Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hello, and welcome back to Joe on Joe Illustrated. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and this is the podcast where I go through G.I. Joe comic books and cartoons and, whatever floats our boat that week these days. Page by page, panel by panel. In this case, it's Joe on Joe Illustrated. So we're doing an episode, an issue rather, of G.I. Joe Real American Hero, the comic book from Marvel Comics and Larry Hama. Today's issue is number 61, and we're going to give it our fine Joe on Joe eye. But before we do that, and I want to make sure to ask all of you to follow me on social media at Joe on Joe Pod at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. Let me know, do you want to be a member on the show? Do you want to be a guest on the show or a member? Whatever. You want to be a guest on the show? And you can also, if you want to help support the show, we do run a Patreon. It's patreon.com/joeandjoepod. And there you get access to all of the Joe and Joe Illustrateds that we've done. We've done all the issues up to this one, plus the annuals. And we're going to start getting into special missions, which I believe are going to be exclusive to the Patreon page. So, I appreciate the support, and you guys help keep the lights on, and all my patrons are fantastic. And if you hear this and you haven't gotten your face mask, ping me, because I think I sent it to everyone whose address I have. But if I haven't sent you one, that means I don't have your address. So, we've got Joe and Joe face masks. I want to make sure I get them into your hands. And what an eye it is. This is a classic issue. So, listeners, if you guys are G.I. Joe fans of the comic, you may know this little bit of history. I got to be squarely honest with you. I didn't know some of the details on this book. This was one of the very first, this era was right when I really first got into G.I. Joe myself. It came out in July of 1987. I was 12 years old. I probably had been reading G.I. Joe comics maybe for at the most a year at that point. So I was super into it. I've read this comic book a million times. What I never knew until I started literally prepping for this podcast was that the G.I. Joe special with the Phil Gossier and Scott Koblish cover that is homaging the the Spider-Man McFarlane cover, that special was a reprint of the unused pencils of this book, because I don't have that special. That's just one that I've never gotten around to getting, because what I always thought it was a reprint of issue 60, the issue that Todd's pencils did appear in. And it wasn't until I dug into the details on this that I saw that, oh no, it was the unused pencils for 61. Now, I have the G.I. Joe IDW hardcover collection here in front of me, which has both versions of the issue. It has the printed version, and it also does have the Todd McFarlane one. But I never cracked the book open because I hadn't gotten to that part for my prep for the show, and I've read all these comic books, and I have all these individual comics in my bin. So what I thought for years was only getting that special just to get that sweet cover. That's not what that reprint special is. It sells for over $100 these days when you can find it on eBay. I know it's something that's now very quickly shot up to the top of my radar, because I literally have like 199.9% complete G.I. Joe collection for the American stuff. Actually 100% for the American stuff, and then I find out this. So now it drops down to that 99% completion rate. So I gotta get myself a copy of that original G.I. Joe special. But we're not covering the special today. We're going to cover the special next week. Today, we're going to be covering the actual printed version of 61, the one I grew up with, the one I love, the one with Marshall Rogers pencils, which Marshall Rogers is a legend, guys. But before we get into that, listeners, I know what you need in your life. You need more podcasts. And you also love movies. So why not do a podcast that's about not one movie? It's about not two movies. It's about 3 movies and a meal. I'm talking the Movies and a Meal podcast. This show is great. It's brought to you by Keith, Brad, and Ben, and each week they bring a new movie to the table, which they all discuss as a group. And it's not, your highfalutin movies. It's What We Do in the Shadows, The Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, and Out of Sight. It's Bad Education, Ghost Rider, and A View to a Kill. It's X-Men Last Stand, Queen Sugar, The Mandalorian, and Major League 2. They are a lot of fun to listen to. You guys know Ben. It's our friend Ben Pensarga. He was a guest on Joe and Joe. In fact, Ben was the very first remote guest that I ever had on this podcast, so he's always got a special place in my heart. I'm really digging this. I just started listening to it last week. It is a lot of fun. They bring a guest in. The guest, I listened to their Heathers episode. They were joined by Kelly, and she went in depth on her favorite movie, which was Heathers, and it made me want to go watch Heathers to watch with them. I really dig it. So guys, find them out there at Movies and a Meal, Twitter, Instagram. Their website is moviesandameal.podbean.com. They put out one episode a week. Give them a listen, guys. Support them. Let them know Joe on Joe sent you. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. It is quite entertaining. And now back to the show. All right. And now we're going to start the show off like we do every episode of Joe and Joe Illustrated with a little bit of...
You were saying...
And let's take a peek at what was on the stands in July of 1987. The Punisher Volume 2, Number 1 was on the stands. This is his regular ongoing series. Punisher hot off that Mike Zeck miniseries, which is absolutely classic. And certainly the Punisher regular series ran for a long time. Punisher is one of those characters that, like, I think he was always best as this, like Wolverine. Like, he was the straw in the drink, you know? Not necessarily on his own. And when you read a lot of these early Punisher stuff, which is, they're well done. And Carl Potts, I think, wrote most of them. Jim Lee drew a lot of it. Klaus Janson did this cover. Like, really talented people worked on it. They get really repetitive really, really fast. And it doesn't let up, like, throughout the 90s. Like, it's arc after arc of Punisher just killing different bad guys. I think it took... Even when Garth Ennis was writing it, which I think Garth absolutely did a perennial legendary version of the character, it was only the random arc that really stood out. That's my take on the Punisher. I like him a lot as a character, but I don't necessarily like him so much as a month-to-month follow. Because he, you know, similar to what Deadpool does as a comedic character, he kind of breaks the reality of the superhero world. Because he is a killer and he is, you know, pretty much a psychopath, to have him then, you know, occasionally go shoulder to shoulder with some of the traditional heroes, Captain America's, your Iron Man's, etc., that they would tolerate Frank Castle doing what he does. It's always tough to stomach. So I like it when he shows up for a brief appearance, kind of how they would handle him when he'd show up with Daredevil, and they'd always be at each other's throats, but he'd help Daredevil out and then, you know, disappear off into the night. That's my preferred Punisher. Having said that, though, these stories are a lot of fun. And if you're in the mood to read some good Punisher comics, sure, you know, they're always usually really well done. A lot of them are, you know, he's an Incredible Hulk type character. Waxing poetic, telling you guys about the Punisher, I'm sure you're well aware. But he's very much like the Hulk, where it's not so much about him. He doesn't change very much. It's the people around him that really do the changing. And that's where I think he does the best as well. And so when his stories are just constantly about a new rotating cast of people that he's interacting with, it can be hit or miss. The Transformers Headmasters miniseries started this month, Volume 1. I'm actually reading for the first time the Transformers collection like 2 years ago or something. Comixology had it probably was around the Bumblebee movie, I think. Comixology had a crazy sale on all the digital versions of the Transformers comics. It was like 75% off or something. So I snapped up all of them. It's a really nice collection, and they're fun to read. Obviously, as a G.I. Joe fan, it's that same vibe. And the Headmasters one is crazy. If I recall, I believe I read this one already. It's like the Headmasters are from another planet, and they were going extinct, and so they merged their souls with the robotic heads that then, you know, merged with Transformers or something along those lines. But I like that series. It's a lot of fun. So one thing I'll say about almost the entire line of Marvel during this time, and you know, at least this specific month, and I mean this with all the kindness I can muster, there's a lot of blah here. I think they were in a kind of a transitional phase. I talked a little bit about this last week with the X-Men, but I think it was kind of going through a lot of Marvel at the time where they, you know, had these huge, you know, 85, 86 were these huge years with Secret Wars, and they introduced the black costume for Spidey. You know, we haven't gotten to Venom yet, that kind of a thing. There's just a lot of when you look at all these individual issues, Daredevil 244, Fantastic Four 304, these are all just good, but workmanlike comic books. There's nothing really that pops, and maybe it is kind of that time where they were resetting, because I know that like in the X books they were getting ready to do Fall of the Mutants in about 6 months. I'm not really sure, and it's summertime too, so you would think that there would be more pop on the shelf, but there really isn't. And this might be hangover from after doing the Secret Wars. They might have said, okay, well, how do we get this in? Because I know they haven't started like the annuals, things like Atlantis Attacks and that kind of stuff. So it's weird. It is weird. If you look at all these books, New Mutants 53, Iron Man 220, this is a real middle of the road month. We'll just say this month specifically, but I think this era, these few months for Marvel Comics, it really is. It doesn't make them bad. It just doesn't make them nothing to write home about, Mom. You know what I mean? And for real, G.I. Joe 61 might be the best book on there, and I genuinely mean that, not just because I'm talking on a G.I. Joe podcast for now. So, with that in mind, let's go check out DC Comics.
You were saying?
DC had some cool stuff going on. Batman 409, that's continuing the Jason Todd saga. That's really key. Detective 576, that's got it's got the first McFarlane cover on Batman Year 2. It's also, McFarlane did the interior art, so that's exciting. A lot of McFarlane on the shelf this month. This is neat. This is one that's really overlooked, and I understand why. I don't think he's never really, Dr. Fate. It's Dr. Fate #1. He's never really been a massive breakout character. However, this is Keith Giffen doing Dr. Fate in that kind of new style that he would bring to the Legion 5 years later in about 2 years' time. He was working on that in the Legion books at the time, but it wasn't, let's see, where were the Legion? Yeah. So on Legion, we're on Legion 36, which has got some great Steve Lytle stuff. And Giffen would come back to the book, I think in maybe like a year and a half. And his style that he was kind of working on when the Legion first split off a couple years back, which is very like heavy inks, very suggestive, very suggestive artwork, kind of blocky. If you've ever seen the Legion 5 Years Later, which just was collected in a wonderful omnibus, please pick it up. It's so good. That's that style that Giffen would perfect when it got to the 5 Years Later, which was 1990, I believe. And so he's in that place now where he's perfecting that look. And that's this Dr. Fate #1. It was a mini series. And it's really strong. The cover is really evocative of that style. So if you check it out, it's the Dr. Fate from 87 cover. You'll see that kind of sparse storytelling. I mean, it's Giffen. It's his style. But he would go in and out over the years between this kind of a smooth cartoony to this hard-edged, jagged cartoony. I prefer the hard-edged, jagged cartoony, if you ask this guy. Justice League #3. This is the bwahaha part. And this is where they meet up with Dimitri, Rocket Red, who was a great addition to the team. And I believe this is them versus the Rocket Reds, and I believe they do meet Dimitri for the first time. Although, if I'm remembering correctly, he's in this issue, but he's not identified as such until he actually joins the team later. And he's got like a busted tooth from when Batman or Guy Gardner beat him up in this issue. But it's the Justice League in Russia versus the Rocket Reds. It's really cool. Really cool. Watchmen #10 is on the shelf. It's getting closer. The clock is ticking closer to midnight. So far, as of this recording, only one issue of Rorschach has hit the shelves. That new DC Rorschach book. It's good. I'm enjoying it so far. I don't hate it. Let's put it that way. It's actually tying in the TV show into the book as well, into the continuity of Watchmen. So that's exciting to see. It's you really have to pay close attention to kind of place everything, because there's a lot of subtle references to it. But it's solid. So overall, I think DC has an edge this month, just because there's a couple of real slammers, like Year 2 and the Jason Todd stuff. The new Flash series is off to a good start. The Justice League is all-timer. In that Legion book I was talking about earlier, it's Legion 36, and they voted in the new leader. And if memory serves, on the cover is Breck Bannon, Polar Boy, and if memory serves, that's because he was voted leader, which historically I believe then led to the dissolution of the Legion. Poor Breck Bannon. So that's it for DC Comics.
You were saying?
Now in the movie theater in July 3rd. This is wow. This really was a solid year, man. For at least in my childhood memories. 2 classics, both Adventures in Babysitting and Inner Space, were released on July 3rd for that 4th of July weekend. Adventures in Babysitting's an all-timer. It's in that Goonies level of childhood classics. Elizabeth Shue won everyone's heart as the put-upon babysitter who can't control her kids. I'm from Chicago. They were all over the city of Chicago. It was like Ferris Bueller in that regard. It also featured Vincent D'Onofrio playing Thor, who was fantastic. He was the well, he wasn't technically Thor, I guess. He was the car mechanic who just happened to look exactly like Thor and carry a hammer, etc. and so on, because the little girl was obsessed with Thor, which was great because it was the Walter Simonson Thor. Like, there was a lot of comic book love in that movie. It's absolutely fantastic. If you haven't checked it out in a long time, please do. It's so good. And also Inner Space. I adore Inner Space. Joe Dante directed it, who's just great. If you love B movies and you love like horror kind of genre cinema, you gotta love Joe Dante. And Inner Space, Dennis Quaid going into Martin Short's body, and then you get to see Martin Short, just act the fool for the better part of an hour and a half. It's fantastic. Inner Space is so good. And then on the 10th, Vincent D'Onofrio ruled July of '87 was a big month because it's Full Metal Jacket with, of course, Vincent D'Onofrio. What was it? Private Pile? Wasn't that it? So good. R. Lee Ermey. This is one of those movies like Stripes. I think we talked about it with Stripes too, way back when. It's the training camp part is always the most interesting part of most of these war movies. And I think Full Metal Jacket is no exception there. The training camp scenes are just legend. And then what happens after that, I'm always like, meh, it's great. I mean, it's great. Do not get me wrong. I'm not denigrating it. But it's always the most fascinating to me, the training camp stuff. And I don't know why that is. We also have Revenge of the Nerds 2, Nerds in Paradise. I'm not saying that's a great movie, but, it is Revenge of the Nerds. Those movies do not hold up. I am not here to tell you that they hold up, because they do not. Oh, this is funny, though. Bradley Whitford, who would go on to be in, Billy Madison and most importantly, I think, West Wing and all that. He was in Adventures in Babysitting, and he was in Revenge of the Nerds 2. He had a huge month as well. And then July 17th, we get Jaws the Revenge, which is not a good movie. Also, the shark that followed the Brody family all the way to the Bahamas to get its revenge. Not good at all. Although July 17th, an absolute legend, RoboCop, man. RoboCop is life. Peter Weller, the amazing Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Ronnie Cox, Kurtwood Smith, Miguel Ferrer, Daniel O'Hurley. RoboCop stands up today more than it did before and absolutely merits a rewatch. RoboCop 2 merits a rewatch. And even though I know he wasn't in it, RoboCop 3 is not terrible. It's not well done, but it's not terrible. When I say he, I'm talking, of course, the great Peter Weller. But RoboCop 2 absolutely deserves a rewatch. It might even be more, I don't know if it's hard to say it's more satirical and biting, but it says more. It's got less Robo growth in it, which I think why it suffers. But yeah, RoboCop is great. Just, guys, stop what you're doing again this weekend. Just stop it and go rewatch RoboCop if you haven't seen it anytime recently. And when I say recently, I mean like in the last week. Go watch RoboCop. July 24th, Summer School. That is a classic. Carl Reiner directed that. I don't think I realized that. Mark Harmon, Kirstie Alley, Robert Thomas, Courtney Thornton, the great Dean Cameron. Summer School is awesome. I loved Summer School. I watched that so many times. Mark Harmon was forced to teach Summer School, and it was a summer beach comedy romp. It was really funny and great, and I had no idea Carl Reiner directed that. I need to revisit that with that eye. Also, this is a huge July. Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. Another terrible movie, but one that I absolutely love. I absolutely love Quest for Peace. It is in its earnestness about wanting to say something about nuclear weapons and about how, we can't just rely on one person, whether it's Superman or any kind of one world leader, that we have to be the change we want to see in society. Having said that, it was a canon film, so of course it was produced terribly. The only great thing about it is you do get some great slugfests with him and Nuclear Man. A nod to Bizarro without doing Bizarro, which was a lot of fun. And of course, Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor is always fun. Uncle Lex. And while there's a ton of ridiculousness in Superman 4, I gotta give it up, because Christopher Reeve, the only reason this movie got made is Christopher Reeve wanted to make this movie, and he wanted to make a statement. So, maybe next time, maybe don't team up with Cannon. But, oh man, Living Daylights, the 31st, July 31st, and The Lost Boys. What? Okay, Living Daylights, James Bond. We just recently lost Sean Connery. I'm a massive James Bond fan. I absolutely adore James Bond. And The Living Daylights was Timothy Dalton's, I think this was his first outing, wasn't it? This is, yeah, Joe Don Baker. Yeah, the Timothy Dalton era, those movies are good, but they never really feel like good Bond movies. There's just something so flat about them for a lot of various reasons we can get into, but this ain't a Bond podcast. And then The Lost Boys, I love Joel Schumacher. He recently passed, rest in peace. And I know he gets a lot of crap for bat nipples. I've certainly made my share of jokes on that. He's a guy that I think we should revisit in the sense of he made some really, really great movies. Some cheese, some, surface level entertainment. But I love Lost Boys. I'll take Lost Boys any day of the week. I think Lost Boys is absolutely fantastic. And I think it holds up, and I think it's just a sheer delight. So that's it. That's a big month of July.
Premature panic is the sign of an immature mind.
And now we're going to get into G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, number 61. Cover by Mike Zeck. Inks by Bob McLeod. I had that confirmed with me. And this week. And the cover is great. The cover is that it's that style. It harkens back to or there used to be old school Batman covers that they would do this, where it was Batman in the shadows and then there was a spotlight on him. And so that's what this cover is harkening back to. And it's Stalker, Quick Kick, and Snow Job. And they're in shadows, but they've got a spotlight highlighting them. And they're getting not only shot at, but straight up shot up. On the cover, you don't actually see any penetration happening. It looks like there's absolutely a bullet wound. Well, Quick Kick is obviously hurt, but it looks like there's a bullet wound that was drawn, and I would not be surprised if they covered that actual wound with that one of the bullets whizzing by, because you see there's a bunch of bullet lines, action lines to convey the bullets whizzing past them, and then there's one that cuts across the whole page. It never actually hits the wall, and almost every other one covers it up, and it seems to be used to cover up the hole of where Quick Kick got shot. So I wonder if that was maybe editorial saying we need to cover that, or if it was just Zach purposely putting it there to begin with. But either way, it does perfectly cover the bullet wound, so I'm assuming that is on purpose there. It's great though. I mean, and it's great Zach. Zach does fantastic poses of people shooting things, and this is no exception. You've got that trademark Zach grimace on Snow Job's face. You've got the trademark Zach gaping jaw, he used to draw the Punisher like that a lot. That's what Stalker looks like. And behind him, very subtly, you see that there's concertina wire, and so that they've got their literal backs against the wall. They can't escape. They're getting shot at. This is a great cover. I love it.
Yo, Joe!
Beginnings and endings. Larry Hama script. Marshall Rogers, the legend, storytelling. Danny Bulanati did the inks, or they're calling it finishes. So usually when it doesn't say ink, and we'll get into this. Usually when it doesn't say inks, it usually means that it's probably a little more than inks. Jay Rosen on letters, B. Sharon on colors, Bob Harris editor, and Jim Shooter editing in chief. So we know that this issue was a redraw. So McFarlane had drawn this issue based on Larry's script, based on the story I'm reading in the wonderful Mark Bellomo notes. Larry and probably Bob Harris, they didn't think that McFarlane's art, while gorgeous or whatever, was appropriate really for the book. I agree, and we haven't gotten to that, so we won't get into too much on thoughts on his stuff, but they didn't think it was appropriate, so they had to have it redrawn. So if you think about it, an entire comic book having to be redrawn and keep things on schedule, it makes me a couple things. It makes me think that this was a loose pencil by Marshall, and then heavier finishes by Danny Bulanati. So, sometimes they would call it layouts in this case, or, well, if they called it full pencils, they would call it pencils. In this case, they call it storytelling. So that really makes me think that Marshall Rogers did probably very loose layouts, put everything on paper, and then they sent it to Bulanati to finish up the book. And if you notice, if you know Marshall Rogers stuff, which is stellar, and this book looks great on both guys, so you guys both did a great job. Marshall Rogers is really, really well known for his run with Steve Englehart on Batman and Detective Comics in the 70s. He's got a very thin line, very delicate line, and that is not very evident in this issue. It shows up in a couple places. You see his, his storytelling is here, but you see his actual line work in a few spots as we kind of go through. But it's definitely a heavier line than I would ever think to see from someone that said, "Hey, this is Marshall Rogers." So based on its storytelling and finishes, I'm assuming he did very rough layouts, and then Bulanati came in and finished it. Which, kudos, they both did a great job. It's General Hawk, and he's given a debrief or a briefing to Stalker and Quick Kick and Snow Job and Outback. I've always wondered, even when I was a kid, I always wondered why they chose both Snow Job and Outback, who are essentially the same guy, but one has a bandana for this team. They're both redheads with big giant red beards, and in a comic book that could look very similar. It's hard to differentiate. So I think they do a stellar job in this. One, by giving the headband to Outback and making his hair crazier. His beard is certainly bulkier than Snowjob's beard, and then Snowjob has a very coiffed hairstyle with a more trim beard. But they're both wearing white shirts. Like it's very much the same, and I wonder what that is. I definitely like that what you see at the end happens, that it happens to Outback, and I think it works perfectly for that character. Just wonder why, like, of all the character choices, why Snowjob, I guess is my question. Why pull him out of the mothballs for this when he looks exactly like the other guy?
Yo, Joe!
Now, what the briefing tells us is that this guy, Devlin Winchell, he's a reporter, and he just got busted in the People's Democratic Republic of Barovia. So he's being held in this Barovia gulag, right? So the Joes have to go in and get him. This whole scene, this briefing room, everything here, very reminiscent of G.I. Joe #1, guys. Remember that. It was the what's her name? The lady who was kidnapped by Cobra. They had the briefing, and the team had to go in and get her out. Blah, blah. It was very reminiscent of that, except this time, as we work our way down the page, they tell us that they're going to be discharged from the service for the duration of this mission. So this is very different in the sense of, like, they're doing wet ops here. Like, they're doing off-the-book operations. That wasn't the case back in G.I. Joe #1. They were still G.I. Joe. Storytelling-wise, this whole book is it's a masterpiece in telling a story. What I really dig is that Marshall and Danny give each of the four main characters their own panel in the second row. So you get Hawk filling us in on what's up, and then you get to see the reactions of the guys and focus how important each one of these individual guys will be to this mission that we're about to see. Then we get the panel of who they're going after, or actually that's their contact, guy by the name of Spigoo. Quote, looks like a wet rat, but he's cool. So, and then at the bottom we get told that they have to hand in all their passports and all their stuff, that they're going in, blank. One of the cool things as they're focusing on each character, they give us their cover, and this is important because I got a question about something later. Stalker's an African agricultural attaché. Quick Kick is a Southeast Asian economist. Outback, he passes himself off as an Arab refinery engineer, and Snowjob is a Finnish vodka distiller. So remember all that.
Yo, Joe!
Meanwhile, in Denver, Colorado, we're following back up with the plotline from last issue with Billy going to the ninja school. So he says, "Hey, Dad, I remember everything. You're a leader of Cobra. I was a ninja in training." He tells Rap to go lay an egg. That's great. But he remembers all the pain, all the sorrow. But what he can't remember to hate as much as he did. So the gift that was given to him from this amnesia is that he seems to have been separated from the anger and the emotion that he had. But he remembers everything that happened in his life, but he can't be as angry about it as possible. I think probably, you lose an eye, you lose a leg, you lose a lot, you lose your father, really. It's hard to hold on to that anger and just you just want to push forward and move forward, especially when you've trained in the martial arts and you have this community of, in this case, ninjas that he wants to be a part of. that he can let go of all that hate. So I think that's important. So he tells them, and then I'm talking about Raptor and Fred, was it Fred 7, and Cobra Commander. He tells them that, hey, I'm taking off. Unfortunately, Fred is having none of it.
Yo, Joe!
Pulls out a gun, which Billy promptly karate chops away. He then kicks him in the face, kicks the whistle out of Raptor's hand, so Raptor can't call his birds, and then he's about to, beat the hell out of Raptor, and so Raptor backs down and stuff. He says, Billy says, too much bad karma generated by kicking someone as pathetic as you. So we get to see Billy in action with his prosthetic leg doing a lot of kung fu on this page. Really easy to follow transitions from panel to panel, knocking the gun out, kicking him in the face. You get a little background, of like the pieces getting knocked off the walls as Fred gets thrown back. So it's real easy to follow. Just enough backgrounds to make sure you know where you're at.
Yo, Joe!
And now Cobra Commander draws on him, which is wild. So I love this page. I love this page for a few reasons. So the top, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of drama. You got a dad drawing on his son, and it's well rendered with placement in the room. You know where you're at. Your camera's your medium shot is set, and then you get Billy in the middle. So you get opposing viewpoints on the bottom. Basically, in the middle, you basically get Fred saying, shoot him before his mouth, ruins us. Blah blah blah, and then you get Billy conflating that, and we see all the anger is drained from his face. And then it's just a solo shot with no background work, just saying that you have my word on that. He promises his dad. He's not going to rat anyone out. He just wants to be left alone. And then we cut back to the same shot that we had in the first panel. Now the camera's shifted about, it's shifted a little to the left, right? So now Cobra Commander's figure is a little more to the right. You see more of the doorway, which Billy is left out of. But it's shifted just enough to show us, it's that between panel movement, right? So earlier the focus was on Cobra Commander and the anger and the gun, and now it's shifted slightly to the left, showing us Billy leave, and it leaves this stillness on that shot. You could imagine that if it were an actual like camera move. It's really smart. I love when comics do this. They don't just do the exact same shot from above. They shift it just slightly enough to make movement for us and to give us that emotion. And in this case, it's the emotion that deflates the room. Cobra Commander, his gun's down, he's defeated. Raptor's putting his focus and attention on Billy. He's not glancing over Cobra Commander anymore. And the only one that is looking at Cobra Commander is the guy who's unsatisfied, which is Fred 7. He doesn't care about Billy. I mean, he cares, he wants him dead, but he's putting all his energy at Cobra Commander. But Raptor and Commander have seen that Billy's the one with the power here, and the power's leaving the room. And that's what this panel does. It's really, really good.
Yo, Joe!
Now, back in downtown Barovia at the Hotel Grad, which is funny. First of all, this dude, there's a lot of, I'm just going to say, there's a lot of, now I'm going to say, this is not like racist in the writing. The characters in this comic are crazy racist. It's not funny, but it's hilarious. This guy calling Stalker savage. In civilized country, it's customary to tip the cab driver. And then I love that Stalker doesn't take it. He comes right back and he says, take it what you overcharged me for that outrageous roundabout trip. And then as he's checking in, the guy says something about no spitting in the hallways. It's unsanitary, which is like, oh, okay. Like this basically what the picture Larry's painting of this country is, this Eastern Europe, Barovia country, is garbage. Like it's not a great country. It's not a great country with great people. It's not a good scene. But here's why I wanted you to remember what they were all going as in their undercovers, right? So he's there as the cultural attaché from Botswana. When Stalker gets to the 3rd floor and he's still in the hallway, and before he can even get to any room, let alone his room, it's Snowjob is leaning out the door, and he's just yelling at the top of his lungs, "Stalker over here!" Like Snowjob. We went to the trouble of making fake names, all traveling separately, in disguise, undercover, and the first thing you do when you see your buddy in public is yell, "Stalker, who knows what's bugged?" It's freaking hilarious.
Yo, Joe!
And when they get in the room, and again, who knows what's bugged, Stalker's playing, not even playing, hey, everyone here, quick kick? Yeah, all present and accounted for. We're all here. Like, there's no subtlety involved in this. They don't know who's listening in. Come on, guys. I know we gotta, I know from a comic perspective, we don't have a lot of time to waste. We got to get to it. But that's just hilarious to me. But they've met up with their their contact, this Spigu guy. It seems like he's got everything under control. And Spigu says that Devlin is being held in the basement of the state security building. We get some blueprint layouts. I feel like in an issue, and actually we'll see when we get to the Todd McFarlane one. I'm not going to look ahead. If the layout, the blueprints were rendered a little more clearly. There's a whole panel of just the blueprints, but they're very lightly rendered, so you actually can't see anything. I feel like that's in issue 1, like we would have seen the actual layout of the prison. You know, like it's a little bit of an homage to that, but instead it's just kind of a loosely rendered piece of paper with some hatching on it. And we do learn that there's no way to know what the actual layout is because these are like the old records, so things may have changed. Yo, Joe! Which might not bode too well for the guys. We see more information about the front of the building, where they have the floodlights, who's on duty, all that stuff. Stalker's very excited about this. Quote, "These guys aren't used to good old-fashioned American jailbreaks. They need guns." Spigu opens a suitcase, and there's a whole bunch of guns there waiting for the Joes. So far, what's great about this issue is like Larry does the traditional setup that all these kind of heist movies and heist stories, do. They have to infiltrate they get in there. And then, at some point, these stories always, something goes wrong. But leading up to it, you have to fill in everything. You have to tell us where because that's essentially what this is. They're breaking a guy out, but it's a heist movie. It's a breakout movie. It's all the same of, here's the plan. We're going to go in here. We're going to do this. So the reader, viewer, however you want us to call it, we know what to expect. We know what they think they're going to accomplish so that when it goes incorrectly, we're more invested because we know that they expected A to happen. And it turns out B is really happening. And so now what? Now we're in the moment with them trying to improv our way out of the action as soon as they are. And that's how you tell these stories. You set it up with, it's going to go easy, it's going to go smooth, and then once it breaks, everything has a more immediate feel to it. Yo, Joe! Now we check in with Billy and the ninjas. He goes back to that dojo, and the blind master is gone. And he says there is a woman named Jinx that was in. Someone's speaking to him from the shadows, and it's someone in like a kind of a storm shadowy looking outfit, but we see quickly that it's a woman. And this is where Jinx actually gets name checked for the first time, because if I remember correctly, she wasn't named last issue. Jinx straps down and she pulls off her mask, and she says, "Yeah, she works with G.I. Joe. Blind Master doesn't work with G.I. Joe. He's got his own path, but Billy, she'll help Billy if he really wants help." Yo, Joe! Meanwhile, back at Fred's garage, Raptor is just pacing, and it's just funny to watch a man in a grown bird suit pacing around with fake bird legs. It's absolutely hilarious. It turns out what Billy said to Fred and Cobra Commander and Raptor really has gotten to Cobra Commander. Like, it's affected him. He's going to give up being Cobra Commander because he watched his son make a kind of sacrifice that he never could have been able to make before. So he's going to give it up. These Raptor and Fred kind of lay out the consequences for the reader. If you give up being Cobra Commander, everything goes down the tubes. Without the Cobra organization, Raptor will go to jail for tax fraud. Fred has gone through the surgery and all the hard work he's put in for Cobra, and like all this stuff. He's sacrificed literally given his life for Cobra. So to see the guy that he gave his life for walk away from it all, what we're doing is the stakes are getting laid out for us, the reader. This is why it's important. It's not just important that, hey, it's Cobra Commander, he's going to quit being it, but it's these guys have personal stakes in it. And then if you extrapolate that, every single person in the Cobra organization has some type of personal stake that does relate to Cobra Commander, being a part of Cobra. They signed up for him, and just as much as they signed up for Cobra. I love what he says, though. "I'll write you both nice letters of recommendation to Serpentor for all the good that'll do. But you have to understand, I've finally seen the light." Yo, Joe! So he takes off that armor, and he heads to the door, and Fred puts a bullet through his chest. Now, he is shot. Straight shot. This sequence of panels is great. So it's 5 panels total. We start with a double spread wide shot. Commander ditching the last of his armor, heading for the same door his son just walked out of. Fred heads over to the armor. Now, if you notice, there's not a lot of backgrounds in this whole issue, especially in these Denver scenes. And that must be because of the rush production. Having said that, they do a good job of putting in backgrounds when they need to give us a sense of what's happening. But like, for example, this panel where Fred is pulling the gun out of the case, it's just on a white back panel. Like, it's really sparse. It's not my favorite. But the panel right below it, after he shoots Cobra Commander, they cockeye it. It's got no real background to it, but they use colors to give us a different looking floor than the wall. It really works. And then that last panel really works because it's just the focus is on Fred picking up Cobra Commander's helmet. The great thing about this armor could be anybody inside. So it's really solid. These are really, it's a great sequence of events. Picks up the gun, shoots Cobra Commander through the chest. So I forget how he heals from this, but it's a good one.
Yo, Joe!
Meanwhile, back in Barovia, the guys are pulling up to that guard station, and they're disguised as a garbage truck. That was their entree into it. But they actually, to the guard's credit, he immediately recognizes that they're not who they're supposed to be. You're not the regular, and it looks like that was see, this is why you don't put two bearded redheads. That was Outback, not Snowjob. Snowjob was hiding in the back of the truck with Stalker and Quick Kick. Outback beats the hell out of the guard, and the other guys break off and they head inside. Outback, Spigu, they cover the alley.
Yo, Joe!
And inside this panel, the Stalker punching this guy out. That's a great Stalker panel. Puts an Uzi up the guy's nose to say, which want the keys to the basement. They go down. There's just two guards. Quick Kick whaps them with his nunchucks. There's some nice tooth breakage in this panel, which is a lot of fun to see. I love Quick Kick. He's underrated. He was used on the show a lot. He was pretty funny. I think he's underused in the comic, although this is certainly a lot of Quick Kick action. I think he's great, although he's certainly clothed out. They're all, by the way, they're not dressed in their Joe Greens or anything. They're in full on like black infiltration outfits, except Stalker still has his brand, which is great.
Yo, Joe!
So now Snowjob's putting the sleep on one of the guards, and they quickly find out that all the cells are empty. And this is when the story turns. And how do you know that? One, obviously, it's when all the cells are empty, and they're not supposed to be empty. However, if you weren't reading the texts visually, how do you know the story turns? Because in this second row, the doors, the way that Marshall laid out the doors, literally turns you, the reader. So picture one panel going across where you see Snowjob knocking a guard out, and then the other two are opening these other cell doors, seeing that they're empty. And that's all rendered normally, backgrounds and everything. But then there's a thin strip. Picture 4 small squares, and each square, the door is not on a normal, up and down angle. It's actually cockeyed 90 degrees. Then the next one is upside down. Then the next one is right side up. Then the next one is 90 degrees in the other direction. As their world turns upside down, as this mission turns upside down, so does the comic book. This line of images. That's the moment when everything goes south for these guys and for the book. It's a really, really cool storytelling. Totally underappreciated. I think that's great. And so now is the part of the story where everything goes bad.
Yo, Joe!
They got to find out where this Devlin Winchell is. And the one guard that's left, he says that he's in Washington. He was exchanged this morning for one of our own captured spies, one of the Barovian captured spies. Your State Department made the deal. It's what you would call ultra hush hush. So the Joes got left swinging in the wind because they were already on their on their mission. So while they're trying to figure that out downstairs, a couple other guards upstairs, they find the missing guards, the ruckus that the Joes left. And so they actually hit the alarm. So you get a big old auga, and the Joes got to make a break for it. I like that they don't kill the guard. They just throw him in the cell. But they do come out firing for sure.
Yo, Joe!
And they got to fight their way out. So what we're getting is we're just getting a nice gunfight. Really nicely rendered. I like this. I like the garbage can scenes. There's a lot of detail in there that looks really good. This is also where Quick Kick gets hit. He says, "I'm hit," but it does look like he got hit in the ribs, like possibly from behind. But it looks like he got hit somewhere in the rib cage area, which actually corresponds to that wound on the very, very front cover. And the garbage truck drives off, getting shot at the entire time. And they said, call Colonel Ratnikov, tell him to see off city. Now that guy, he's been in recent issues of Special Missions, which I have yet to cover on this. So I think I need to start covering those. So stay tuned for those, because story does cross over into special missions, which was a first for the time.
Yo, Joe!
So now it's a chase. Now they got to get out of Dodge. Everything's gone wrong. They're no longer covert. They're busting through other cars. They're shooting. Quick Kick's out of it. Snow Job also won. It says Snow Job caught one in the chest, although Outback thinks it's a clean exit wound, which is, thank heavens for a little blessing. But Snow Job's out of the fight too, so it's really only Stalker that's providing any kind of cover fire. These guys drive through the city.
Yo, Joe!
And they hit a roadblock, and not the good roadblock. They hit an actual roadblock. It shoots up their car. They have to turn off into an alley, which of course is a blind alley, and they're cornered. So the guards have pulled to the open end of the alley. The Joes have driven all the way to the very, very back of the blind alley, a dead end. They cannot get out. Spigoo, God bless him, man, just have one issue with us. But he tells them, get out of the truck. He's going to try to buy them some time.
Yo, Joe!
And he floors it. He actually reverses it, not forward. He actually just reverse it the same way he came in, scattering the bad guys. Stalker doesn't miss a beat. This is what I've always enjoyed about G.I. Joe books, is that they don't spend a lot of time on sentimentality when they're on missions like this. Like, there's always someone who goes, no, we're on a mission. We got to we have to take advantage of this. And he quickly says, listen, there's not much time. Listen up, Outback. Quick Kick and Snow Job, they can't make it out without medical treatment. As mission leader, I have to stay with them. It's up to you to get out of here to tell Hawk exactly what went down. Now make yourself scarce. That's an order. So he orders him to get out of here. Very reminiscent, all the way going back to JJ number 1, when they told Rock and Roll that he had to go back and get that tape to Stalker and leave Snake Eyes and Scarlet to fend for themselves in the desert. You guys remember that? Very reminiscent of that. And while this is happening, a literal tank is pulling up.
Yo, Joe!
So now we see Spigoo sees the tank and he says, better than the gulag, meaning this is a guy who, 1, knows that gulags are terrible, and 2, has been in jail. So he knows what's going on. He knows this is his end, and he's meeting it, back first, but face first. And that tank straight up just blows Spigoo all to hell. And it does provide cover for Outback to make his escape.
Yo, Joe!
So by the time the dust settles from that, the guards find the Joes and they say, where are the others? So I think they think that there's a lot more than really just the one that's missing. Stalker says, I don't know nothing, kicks him in the face. You will tell us everything, blah, blah, blah. The Barovian soldiers really don't know what was going on here. So they don't necessarily know that there's one guy that's missing. Stalker's standing on a sewer drain. So we see in these last few things that Stalker's blood drips down that sewer drain and onto Outback's face, who's sitting under there with his gun pointed, ready to fire if someone happens to peek down there. But that's how Outback's got to make his escape. They don't exactly know how many people were involved in this raid. They just know that, these guys were. And underneath, this is interesting, underneath the black clothing, they put the Joes in their normal Joe clothing. So Stalker had his camo gear on. Quick Kick had his Quick Kick gear on. Snow Job, I think, had his Snow Job. It's drawn, actually, in the book I got, it's colored flesh. I think he still has his Snow Job gear on. Yeah, he does, because in the next issue, he's still in his Snow Job gear. So that's kind of a superhero-y, kind of a comic booky thing of them wearing their normal Joe clothes underneath their infiltration blacks, even though they've been disavowed by G.I. Joe and they shouldn't be wearing their Joe clothes anyway, so that they could be, just so that you could then draw them in their Joe clothes later on when we know that they go to the gulag in the next few issues. So that's kind of funny. But Outback is, he's going to have to make his escape.
Yo, Joe!
And back stateside, we get a news conference where they're calling them mercenaries, American mercenaries. That's what they're being referred to as, that they were there to attempt the escape of Winchell. And of course, the State Department says, that's not our way. And Rock and Roll says, it sure ain't their way at all. And we get Flint, Rock and Roll. Looks like the newcomer, Lieutenant Falcon. That's nice to see him drawn there because he just joined last issue. Scarlet, Snake Eyes, who's that? Slipstream, Roadblock, Shipwreck, and Polly. Shout out to Polly. And it looks like Airborne, actually. They're all watching the TV, and no one is very happy about this. And they, Rock and Roll's like, hey, Hawk, when are we putting the mission together to go spring Stalker, Snow Job, and Quick Kick? And Hawk says, I just got word from on high. There's be no rescue attempt. The captured Joes are being written off. Anybody who attempts to defy these orders will be disowned as well. Continued in G.I. Joe Special Missions number 6. What? Now, all right. So this panel tells me something that I've long suspected. And I know I've talked about this on some of these shows. It says on sale April 28th. This book was not on stands in July of 87. This is the July 87 cover date, but that's not exactly what was in this. This book was on stands back in April because the cover date was always 3 months after when it was actually on date. We've talked about this before on the show, but I feel I need to reiterate this here. We're using the July nomenclature because that's what they do in these books. It's on the covers. It's probably easiest to track everything. It's how the websites track it. But just so you faithful listeners know, I know that you know that this book was actually on the stands in April, which means this book was not on the stands the same month that RoboCop came out. This book was actually on the stands 3 months earlier, etc., and so on and so forth. It's a weird disconnect, so I apologize. And you know what's funny? One of the things I was thinking about as I was prepping this, I remember 2 issues from now, the one with Snake Eyes on the cover at the minefield. That was the book I carried with me on a trip to Wisconsin that I took. And it was a July trip. Like it was a July-August trip. And that wouldn't have been on the stands, according to this, until September. And I promise you, that's not the case. I had that book in my hands and carried it with me, which reminded me that, oh, yeah. These books were not on the stands in July. These books were on the stands in April. Bear with me on that. I'm not going to do the math every month. And I wouldn't want you to do it either. So listeners, thank you so very much for listening to Joe on Joe Illustrated. Hope you enjoyed it. Next time, I am going to redo this issue, but we're going to do it with McFarlane style. So it actually might be a much quicker episode because we might just cover some of the big differences in the McFarlane-esque style. But either way, appreciate you all. Thank you for listening. And now you, Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.